Hey guys, it's Hegemony here with Ox.
Hey, how's it going?
We're here doing a second podcast with Grinding Gear developers Rory Rackham and Carl DeVisser. First off, I wanted to thank you both for being here and spending the time with the community to help explain, the development process, of the game that we all love. Carl, would you mind telling the viewers what you specifically do for Path of Exile?
Hello, I do game design and production, mostly game design, particularly when I started it was pretty much all game design, and now there's also a fair bit of making sure other people do their stuff, but yeah, essentially game design, balance, and production stuff.
Being the co-designer of the board game Endeavor, have you used any of your inspirations and ideas to influence Poe and the game design balance overall?
It does have a bit of an influence, particularly early on when doing a lot of the passive tree stuff. So it did inform that a bit. Although the style of game that was the Euro game, very much sort of every decision matters, and I perhaps put too much of that in the passive tree where people need a bit more. I mean, things like the notables help sort of guidance and giving you sort of clear goals. Where making every decision hurt is potentially, not the best thing. So the early on passive tree, every decision mattered, and it was sort of tried to make sure every step you took was a big decision. But actually making it a bit simpler and giving people a bit of early guidance has helped people sort of access the game a bit better as well.
Very cool. Um, uh, Rory, can you also tell us what you do for Poe?
Sure, sure. Once upon a time, I did QA all the time, but now I work pretty much exclusively on new uniques, new skills, and new boss fights, really, and just getting the designers and artists all on the same page when it comes to that stuff.
It says on the website that you enjoy making programmers cry and finding bugs. Could you give us an example of the most absurd bug you found?
It's been a long time since I've actually done any real QA, but there's some pretty awesome things that happen when you cyclone with 10,000% increased attack speed through 300 insects. Just the camera goes insane.
Can each of you guys give us a game idea or item that you wanted to implement that got shot down by other developers?
My design process is pretty much throw ideas at the programmers until one sticks. Like every single crazy idea gets thrown at them until eventually one of them like, oh, we can do that. So let's do that. So I can't name them because they're beyond counting. All sorts of crazy things that I like to do to the code that would turn it into a pile of mush, and the programmers reduce them to tears, which I enjoy. But yeah.
So it's basically the opposite. Just almost all of them get shot down, some of them squeeze through.
Yeah, that's sort of part of the design process, really. I mean, lots of what we have to do is creating content. So each time we do a sort of a new league type or a new set of things, there's usually a huge list of things we need. And to do that, you end up with several people throwing ideas out, most of which get shot down. Usually the best ones get shot down, and later someone comes back and go, I think I can make this idea good. And some people are particularly good at that. So like Jonathan, the lead programmer, is quite good at sort of coming back and taking an idea and saying we can make this good if we change it in this way, and then it becomes a very good part of the game.
So does, tying in with the next question, do time constraints play a big factor? While it might be a good idea, it's just way too long and technical to program.
Yeah, pretty much whenever we are coming up with a skill or a boss or a unique even, it's always about the cost of the item in terms of development time. How much time is it going to cost the programmers, the artists? How much it's going to cost us in future by creating mechanics that we then have to keep looking after all the time. There are certain skills and so on that we keep having to tweak every time we make a major gameplay balance change. So that always comes into account. Sometimes it's worth it. Like Spectral Throw took 10 times more programmer time than Lightning Trap, but it's an entirely new, interesting mechanic that adds more to the game, adds a different play style, so it's worth it, really.
All right, transitioning into some more of the PvE balance questions we have. After the changes you guys made with map size, for moving maze and area size just into the implicit roles on the map, how do you feel about the XP rates in Domination and Nemesis? and the overall success of sustaining a higher map pool?
So if we look at the maps run, I mean, there's a good amount of maps run. So last week, about 560,000 maps were run in the game. And if I look at the percentages of which sort of tier of them we're done, they're about what we want to sort of achieve, where there's, you know, a fair few number of 66s done, and then there's sort of a level of map which is done at each level is sort of drops a bit. But that being said, it has upped the rate at which people get to 100. And I don't think playstyle matters as much as some people seem to think it does there, and the fact that there's more XP to be had. The people who want to get to 100 will find a way, and now it's just sort of an easier bar to meet.
So are you guys okay with the difficulty shift and how much easier it is now to just run, say, 77 and 78 maps than it used to be?
I wouldn't mind if it was a little bit harder than it is, but I think people would be a bit upset if we tried to nail it back a bit. We do want people to be able to, when they get onto their computer, feel they can always make some progress. So it was probably too hard where sometimes you've got people sat down and they feel they couldn't make any progress in the game. So I think it's close to about right.
Was the time frame of the 4-month leagues a decision based on development time? It seems there's a growing popularity for people wanting 3-month leagues versus 4. Are you guys more comfortable with the 4-month leagues because of the time it takes to patch, implement, test, and change things?
That is a consideration. We also find a lot of people do quite like 4 months. We even have people requesting 5 and 6 months. Part of it is not everyone plays the game at the same rate, so people are playing just a few hours a week, and we do have a lot of those players. Would probably feel a bit time pressured if it was only like 2 months or 3 months. There are a lot of things that go into it, but development time is certainly part of it. Particularly when we're looking over the Christmas period, we basically had a month where there was sort of not much happening. Being able to get a whole lot of stuff ready, which is now not just going to be new league modes, we're going to be, you know, adding a big chunk of content every 4.5 months or so. So we need that extra time.
So we spoke with Chris last time, and we had some questions about elemental attack-based items, gems, and talents, and he kind of forwarded us to you guys. Do you have any insight on what we can expect to see in the future as far as elemental attacks are concerned?
Yeah, so elemental versus physical is a pretty tough thing to balance. I mean, the few differences they have are massive. The fact that physical gets easy access to leech, while elemental just has easier access to damage as well as the status elements. I mean, well, originally anyway. We push the physical now has easier access to damage, which gets one up on the elemental damage. And this is always going to go back and forth unless there's some clear differentiating advantage that the other simply can't have. So the answer to this is probably that we're going to be introducing more skills and mechanics that benefit elemental damage rather than just keep tweaking the numbers back and forth, because they'll never be equal. All we can really do is give them their own interesting playstyles and their own, you know, differentiating characters as much as possible beyond just damage and survivability.
So that includes like different changes possibly to like the skill tree as well.
Yeah,
because right now there are very few. Sorry, there are very few. Like WED, for example, I think there's only like 6 or something, and they're on opposite sides of the tree.
Yeah, we've got. I mean, the fact that was sort of the advantage of weapon elemental damage prior to this current 4-month league. Everyone went weapon elemental damage because you just got damage from gear, not from passives, which gave you more passive flexibility. But now we buffed the passives on the physical tree, so it was worth it anyway with physical. It's going to keep going back and forth unless we add new mechanics and entirely new things to the passive tree, not just damage, but actual interesting things that change how you play with elemental damage, which is it's still a very early plan at the moment, but sometime in the next 4 months, we're definitely going to see something to change up the game with elemental damage a bit.
That sounds great.
Tying into the... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just about to say, from the strictly numeric point, you shouldn't be surprised if there is a slight sort of buff to elemental things, and part of that is not just the attack-based things. caster elemental stuff's probably a bit on the downside at the moment, so we'll see what we can do with that.
Tying on with a previous question, would it be possible to add something that would consume your power charges in exchange for magic immunity or mitigation, much like what Immortal Call does with endurance charges?
The short answer to that is no. This has as much to do with the sort of nature of power charges in the game. We don't want the charges to sort of basically be different attribute or styles of the same thing. So power charges definitely have a different role to play than endurance charges. Endurance charges are about survivability, whereas power charges are more about crit and damage.
We've also got a lot of mechanics that players have to entirely mitigate damage types or greatly protect them, which makes it pretty hard to design boss fights when there's no sort of mechanic that bosses can do that hurts every player.
Right. It's good to have some classes able to tackle down certain bosses that do certain things and struggle with others.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. It's kind of the next question I have is it's kind of along those lines and referring to some of the builds that are more apt to mitigate everything, mainly referring to builds that can go max block, and not just ones that use Aegis Aurora, but that's one of the big candidates. And last time when we talked with Chris, he mentioned that there were some possible changes in the next patch, the next big patch, to block. Do you have anything to say or elaborate on that?
So block is one of those dangerous sort of mechanics that when you want block, you want lots of block. So it's one of those ones that fits. If you get the balance slightly wrong either way, there'll either be no one who blocks or everyone blocks. There is a bit of a choice at the moment, so we've got the balance sort of kind of in a good place, but it's not perfect. So there will definitely be some work looking at block and things that interact with block. This is even more apparent in PvP, where block is quite a big feature, both spell block and physical block, and block mitigation or block cancelling.
So is there aren't plans necessarily of changing the whole system of where a block will totally cancel out all the damage? That's something that you guys are planning on sticking with? Just maybe tweaking the numbers a little bit?
At the moment, we don't have a sort of a full system change planned for that. Whether we will in the future or not is not something I'm wanting to rule out. But in the next sort of 4-month cycle, it'll definitely be the same essential mechanic with adjustments.
Yeah, some developers are pretty attached to block the way it is, and it's not nice to just change a mechanic from underneath people who really like it.
Right. Yeah, I love block too. I almost max it on every character that I can. My next question was in regards to some of the skills that I consider really enjoyable, but they have a really high barrier with their mana cost. For example, Elemental Hit and Dominating Blow. I mean, Dominating Blow can get up to over 300 mana per swing, and while they're very fun and unique, they're extremely hard to support without forcing people to use certain items, maybe like Soul Taker, or forcing people to use Blood Magic.
So my first answer to that is good. Dominating Blow is moderately insane, and once you start to sort of take over a map with Dominating Blow, you probably had that experience where starts off hard, then you sort of hit a tipping point and you just roll through the map. So to a certain extent, the mana cost of Dominating Blow needs to be quite high. Elemental Hit's a bit of a different story. Elemental Hit's kind of a hard skill to manage because it can sort of do all the elements. So its flexibility is much higher than it appears, because if you hit frequently with it, you sort of cycle through the elements over time and you get a lot of benefit out of that. Whether it's at the right place or at the moment, possibly not. But it's always sort of been pitched as a kind of a specialist skill, so it's probably got a bit of a mana cost being higher as a result.
Yeah,
Right.
we've kind of lowered the mana cost of quite a few skills not long ago, and we may do the same again because we don't want Blood Magic and EV to be mandatory, but we'd like there's still be a reason to take them. You don't want it, so there's no reason to get all that extra mana.
Are there any talks of adding a death grip type ability? Something that could add flavor to the combat of sweep or cleave? Can you guys discuss the pros and cons with this kind of thing in the game, and if there are any syncing issues related with it?
I'll let Rory address the sync issue side of things, but if you mean like sort of the wild death grip kind of thing, or something that brings monsters close together or brings them towards you, yes, there will be abilities that do this. We have some definite ones planned, and you should be playing in the new leagues and Sacrifice the Vow to have a look what exists for that.
Oh man.
But yeah, we do have to be very careful with these kinds of abilities because they are sync-tastic. Like you've met Brutus. We don't want to have a player skill that can so easily throw monsters to places where they're not on the server and that kind of thing.
That's awesome. Are there any plans on improving or adding staff nodes on the tree? How do you guys feel about staffs in general? It's evident on the tree that there are a lot of crit-related staff nodes, and seeing as they're the highest crit chance two-hander, they're also very hard to roll properly with that extra spell affixes, and it's not too rewarding, seeing as how widespread the talents are, to make a competitive staff build. What are your thoughts on that?
So we've had a couple of passes at trying to sort of improve staffs on the tree, or staves on the tree, and each time we've sort of added a bit more to it. So it turns out to be a bit of a tough one. Part of it is how hard they are to roll, but to a certain extent we don't mind that sort of some weapons might be a little harder or a little easier to roll, although staffs are quite difficult. Although at the moment we can sort of theorize that the best possible weapon you could possibly roll for certain builds is probably a staff, but the actual practice of being able to do that is very hard. We've been looking quite a lot at sort of the costing of some builds. Like some builds, they may not be the most powerful, but because they're quite cheap to do, they're quite easy to do, they end up being quite prevalent, even if there might be theoretical ones that are a lot better builds.
And there is a plan I have to make staves and daggers and scepters and even attack wands sort of easier to roll, just to improve the system, but it's a lot of work to set up, and it has to get traction with everyone in the team, make sure they're happy with it before it goes ahead. But there won't always be as impossible to roll the perfect spellcasting stuff as opposed to wands. Hopefully.
Awesome. Leading into the next subject in PvE, it involves the quote-unquote squishy witch, or arguably the squishy shadow. Are there any plans on improving the defenses and relative accessibility to their early to mid-game starts? Being so far from iron reflexes, unwavering, all the resist and HP notes, it often leads them into CI or lots of block. And as a whole, duelist and rager get their pickings of whatever defense they choose: mind over matter, iron reflexes, unwavering, acro, Onderskull. Is this intended?
Certainly, I'm looking at Witch and Shadow at the moment. It is a focus. This 4-month sort of cycle, they've been quite overshadowed by the Scion to a lot of degree. So lots of people have been going, well, if I'm going to go Witch or Shadow, could I do it better as a Scion? It's pretty close and there's access to the life wheel. I'll go Scion. So Scion's sort of taken over that role, stolen a bit from the Witch and the Shadow. I do like when your survivability options are varied between classes. I mean, in the past, tanky witches have been a thing, and I don't mind them having to travel a certain amount for, sort of off-class defenses. But that being said, we do need to make sure they've got survivability options, and they've got a wide range of survivability options available to them. So yes, we are looking at it, and yes, there will be changes to the sort of Shadow, Witch, and Scion areas of the tree.
So what do you guys think about the community's general comments about the next 4-month league being Path of Summoner, both in regards of how easy it is to survive without much investment, kind of like you're talking about, and then the amount of damage that they're capable of? Do you think it's just over exaggeration, or do you think this is something that's like a real issue.
Yeah, when we were doing the summoner patch, we were kind of saying we could nerf them to match the new damage output that they're capable of getting now, but we are kind of now of the opinion that we should save the nerfs for the 4-month leagues unless something's really, really bad. So you can probably expect some change to minions, but at the same time, we don't want to just give everyone shiny new toys and then take them away right away.
We've also got to make sure that early summoner is viable, perhaps even better than it is currently. So a lot of our sort of experienced hardcore players, are going, well, you do something else and then you swap to summoner. We get a lot of new players who want to play summoner style builds or pet style builds straight away, and we want that to be able to happen. I mean, the summoner patch, I think, helped in some ways. It made the summoners more varied. There are more summoner builds you can do now. But there's certainly some sort of cheap options for, some easy in-game advantages you can get out of a summoner build at the moment. And I'd expect that to change. And there'll also hopefully be some new exciting stuff that people look at some other options for what they can do if they're sort of one of our quite invested players and know what they're doing when the new 4-month leagues come about.
Yeah, I've heard some players say that you have to use the new offerings if you're a summoner, which theoretically you could have still played a summoner prior to it, but it now feels like you get just more damage and more defense if you do it this way. So the preferred answer to that is to add more options. So you have to choose between using offerings and some other skill that also benefit minions or synergizes with the minions in other ways.
The next question ties into the last, and it's a name that we see often in the Twitch community, and it's Path of Spectral Throw. Are there any plans of making more abilities mainstream, like Spectral Throw for leveling? The build diversity early on is very lacking, especially when you're in a competitive race setting. Are you guys generally okay with vast of the majority of early levels being Spectral Throw, which was formerly Cleave, and then phased out into other builds?
So early Spectral Throw, I think, is definitely way too cheap and easy at the moment. And but that being said, Spectral Throw does die away a bit towards sort of high level play. I mean, early maps, Spectral Throw does pretty well, but I think the people who opt for a pure Spectral Throw build right throughout their sort of character's life, they start to get to the point where it's a bit more touch and go, and other builds start to look more attractive. Part of Spectral Throw's advantage, as well as the sort of ease of use and distance, is also its wide sort of weapon choices, so that you get to, if you've already got some character, like a good set of uniques, you get to cycle through them very easily with Spectral Throw, and you're a bit more locked on other skills. So we will be looking at other skills being good for leveling, and also if we can find a way to mitigate Spectral Throw a little for leveling but not hurt it later on, that's certainly an option we'd like to explore.
Yeah, attacks don't really have the same numbers that we can tweak as easily as spells and so on, so it's a bit trickier to get it right at different levels. So Spectral Throw is right at a certain level, but too good early and falls behind later anyway.
We've got a plan, but it needs a fair bit of testing. So the first version of how Spectral Throw like this and how other skills like this didn't turn out too well when we threw it to QA, and they said, well, the end game's looking a bit harsh with it now.
Oh, so the overall plan is to relook at Spectral Throw and not kind of like boost up some of the others at the lower levels?
We will look at other skills as well, and where they sit, and also their flexibility. Like a lot of the other skills, like I said before, are a lot more restrained in their choices, which means even if the balance of the damage was similar, the fact that you can cycle through like different weapon choices a lot easier with Spectral Throw gives it quite an advantage over those other skills.
I'm sure as time goes on, though, and looking in the long term, when as many uniques as you guys release, it'll probably get easier and easier to use other abilities as they get more uniques throughout all the different level thresholds.
Hopefully, yeah. But yeah, it's as you can kind of tell, we've got a lot of ideas and a lot of plans, but there's only 2 of us, so it's hard to prioritize and hard to know what to do first and to get through it all.
So you guys talked a little bit already about this next question we have, about the Scion and how it affects the the choice of which class you're going to ultimately choose. And the Scion, of course, has been by far the most popular. Do you guys feel that it's a bit too strong where it is right now? And are there any changes you would like to make for better class representation?
So I still definitely want the Scion to be a interesting, flexible character. I do think it's a bit easy at the moment, and it also has stolen a bit of identity from some of the other classes. So that is something we do need to address. We also potentially made some of the ability of the other classes to move around a bit too limited. So we'll look at exploring that, but we're not going to sort of open everything to full access to all areas of the tree, if that makes sense. So we do want a bit of class differentiation, but we do want the Scion to be a flexible but harder choice.
The next question is, a lot of the spells feel like they're lacking in base damage, and they're really lackluster even on a 6-link. Do you guys balance spellcaster builds around them having pain attunement, low life, either shavs or baby shavs?
So the short answer is no, we don't sort of want people to only go for those options. We do want there to be choices in how you build your casters. We will be having a bit of a look at sort of spell damage and spell costing, and also hand casting specifically. I think because of the flexibility of totems, traditional sort of witches have, or other casters have been a bit hurt. I mean, it used to be that Path of Exile got accused of being Path of Witches, or witches are OP. That was a while ago now, but so there's been a whole lot of things where flexible casters have sort of dominated certain elements of play, and then they've got a lot of choices, and then we've sort of buffed melee, and we've sort of perhaps overreached on melee. So it was sort of probably about right towards the end of Onslaught, and so it's a bit sort of there'll be a bit of attention to casters, and there'll be a bit of attention paid to hand casting as well.
And by hand casting, you mean self casting?
Yeah. So basically, if you're going spellcaster and you're not using totems and you're not using traps, or at least self casting is your chosen method of playing your character.
Okay. We wanted to shift the discussion over to PvP now. Ox, would you like to lead?
Yes, I've been waiting for this day for a very long time. So the first question I had about general PvP stuff, you guys happy with the current metagame in regards to the matchups, the counters, and the build diversity? Can you give us your thoughts on some of the more popular builds, such as Righteous Fire, Trappers, Explosive Arrow, Punctured, and other dot type abilities, and low life spells?
So the short answer is no, we're not happy, but the more nuanced answer is we know we need to spend a lot of time on it, and we know that time's going to be followed by a lot more time spent on it. Certainly we've got some ability to sort of tweak scaling individually of things, and Righteous Fire is like, marked in big red letters, look at this. But PvP probably needs sort of more love and more ongoing time spent on it. So it is, I know that if we spent a week and we looked at all the PvP builds and we made a bit of changes, like at the moment it's quite a naturalistic system, we just sort of let the PvE balance sit in PvP and it kind of works, but there's definitely problems with it. If we spent a week and we adjusted all the skills and we went, yeah, that's about right, if we didn't look at it next week, there'd be sort of very quickly the PvPers would work out what works, and they'd change things, and there'd be new dominant builds, and it really needs every week someone looking at it and spending some time if we go down the path of sort of adjusting things.
there are certain things like spell block. Player spell damage was never designed around monsters having spell block to mitigate that damage, while attacks to some degree were. So the fact that spell block just mitigates, or can mitigate 75% of a spellcaster's damage in PvP makes a big difference, really. Just something that wasn't considered in initial balance that needs to be now, and players need some answer to it.
What occurs to be a big problem in PvP is the struggle to penetrate through Tempest Shield, Blind, Aegis, Max Block builds. This causes a lot of PvPers to resort to swords for the sole purpose of picking the block penetration on the skill tree. Would it be possible to extend block penetration with a green gem to make other weapons more interesting in PvP matchups? It's all too often, even with the best gear and DPS, that Tempest Shield Blind can result into a death sentence with no damage being dealt.
Yeah, definitely. We want to make it so that the thing is, we want to make it so that there isn't a passive that everyone has to take to counter this, or a support gem that you have to use on your skill, but more if block and Tempest Shield becomes a dominating mechanic, then you start using this other dominating mechanic, this more effective thing, or a skill or something like that to counter it, which is a bit more time consuming than just tweaking the numbers on Tempest Shield and so on. But it creates a more interesting PvP metagame, really.
So PvP will be a bit more of a focus sort of in development coming up. We're not averse to making things which have a PvP purpose. We won't make things like strictly this is a PvP only thing and you'll only get it through PvP. But there will be things where people might go, well, what's the purpose of this? And the PvP goes and we'll go, that's for us. Or at least part of it of that is for us. Some of this we've got to be careful with. Again, this is why we need to keep spending time on this. If we sort of adjust around Aegis for PvP, and then if there were, say, adjustments to Aegis Aurora for PvE, that would have probably an even bigger effect on PvP than it would have on PvE, and we'd need to sort of account for that as well. And yes, you could take that as that Aegis will be looked at.
You guys don't ever plan on having dual functionality on, say, like the same skill gems in between PvE and PvP like some games do? You're just going to try and do an overall, keep it the same for both?
We do actually have the capability to have separate numeric balance for PvP and PvE, or at least separate scaling on each skill to a certain degree. And I take it as quite a good thing that there are PvP things where PvPers don't notice there's some of that, like some of the early scaling sort of still exists. We probably need to spend more time on actually doing that scaling. As for strictly things behaving differently in PvP and PvE, that's certainly a bit more of a difficult thing. I guess it might happen, but I wouldn't expect it in the short term. Yeah, again, that's sort of a time pressure kind of thing.
Yeah. We believe that PvP should be more about understanding the matchups and reacting to what you see. And with the few PvP builds right now that require very little thought and even input, I'm sure you can see where this is leading. There are a few cases where even the cheapest gear can make you extremely competitive, such as like low life molten shell or righteous fire builds that use dual red beaks snapshotting in the beginning. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
So this is a bit of a dual-edged sword for us, because yes, we do want it to be about knowledge and understanding of it, but skill actually sort of knowledge does pay off a lot for people. If you actually look at the really good PvPers, and I'm sure you're aware of this, they usually have good inventory space that they'll fill out with a whole set of options, and during the fight they'll be swapping items back and forth as might befit what sort of matchup they've got. And those players who are good at that and good at understanding the matchups and actually do take advantage of their inventory space, they really annihilate other people, and we get messages saying this person is cheating in PvP, there is no way they could be doing this, whereas they're actually sort of exploiting their knowledge of the game to the fullest extent. So that provides a bit of pressure, but I would like there to be that knowledge is sort of the key to PvP, as well as the ability to play well.
Right, but like something like a 10k molten shell combo one shot is not intended design, right? Like even on a 3-link molten shell, it's kind of like an automation where if you just stand there and have a melee guy come up and attack you, you're just dead outright. Like you guys design more to reward like instead of just like AFKing, putting up a buff and winning. Um, yeah, more actions equal better reward, or
Yeah, we
more.
certainly want not to have sort of cheap and easy ways to succeed like that. I mean, we do want things like Molten Shell and Temper Shield as well to fit some sort of threat component in PvP, but it shouldn't be the thing that wins you the game, but it should be something you have to worry about with timing against someone who's got Molten Shell. So adding, yeah, I mean, we want people to be able to use Molten Shell effectively in PvP, but we want them to work for it rather than sort of have it turn on in the game.
Explosive Arrow seems to be a bit spammy off screen and extremely powerful with Quill Rain. We feel like while off screening is fine, the element of surprise in PvP is non-existent, with the exception of traps that were put down off screen. What are your thoughts on the removal of the X on the minimap in PvP so that you could potentially creep up on your opponent without being detected, other than the terrifying grunt of the leaping marauder that gets closer and closer?
Yeah, I mean, I'd certainly be open to that as long as there's sort of a crossover between having that arena sort of small enough that if the X is off, you can actually find your opponents, and large enough that you can sort of take advantage of it. I think I can't remember if the X actually got turned off for capture the flag. It was certainly discussed as something we want, so it's certainly something we should have the capability of and be able to look at for PvP.
Kind of touching on that same thing, whenever PvP shifts into finally being like an actual season for tournaments and stuff, is it going to be the same setup of maps, or are you guys planning on adding different maps, different sizes, and with different obstacles and stuff like that?
Obviously, the sort of PvP arenas and sort of variants in them is definitely something we'd like to explore. To a certain extent, we've got to do things to make sure that PvP is a worthwhile experience for people and lots of people, because unlike PvE, where we can sort of incrementally improve it and have people come in PvP, you need a population of people playing PvP and continuing PvP to make it really worthwhile for the people playing the game. At the moment, we know that we need to make a lot of big changes and have a lot of cool stuff happening, so we get a sort of an influx of players, and then we have to pay the attention to make sure that we give them a reason to stay, and if there are imbalances, we deal with them quickly.
Yeah, the extra, I mean, we would like to add heaps and heaps of more PvP arenas, but a PvP arena requires a whole lot more balance than a new level of I guess, Twilight Strand.
Right.
Just because there's so much testing and so much fine tuning and so much, you check that there are no spots that are blind spots for players or something like that. And our level designer Joel is very much into his first person PvP games, and he plays a lot of Doom, I think that's what it is. Yeah, and so he's very much into the PvP arena type stuff, and he takes it very seriously.
You touched on this a little bit earlier too, but kind of want to follow up on it. You mentioned how the players that do understand the matchups will go into certain matches, with an inventory full of items. Like, I know I do it. I go in with flasks, different shields, gems, and everything, with a completely full inventory. Is that something you guys plan on keeping in whenever proper tournaments start? And also wanted to ask what your overall feelings were with flask usage in PvP, and how right now it's kind of in a spot where you're almost forced to use 5 warding flasks because of the strength of curses, and especially multiple curses.
Yeah, well, in with the inventory thing, in Magic you have your sideboard, which is a quarter of your deck, so you could theoretically
Right.
replace a quarter of your deck. In Path of Exile, your inventory size is enough to replace your entire set of gear twice. You could have almost completely different two different characters that you switch out for everything, which in my personal opinion might be a bit too much. Like that's like changing what deck you're playing between matches in a Magic tournament. But that is a very interesting mechanic by itself. It shouldn't not exist, but how we deal with it is a tricky question. When we allow you to switch as well is important, whether you should be able to switch at any point or certain times, that kind of thing we need to look at. But it's not an easy system. We can't just say, let's make this change. It requires major changes to do something to that.
And as far as the balance of curses versus warding flasks, part of the problem is that a warding flask is sort of, you've limited in your uses, and we have to keep flask uses reasonably limited, because in early tests of PvP with lots of flask refilling, the matches sort of could go on and on and on. So yeah, the curses are one sort of too powerful for PvP at the moment. Like if you look at Enfeeble or Feeble Chains, I mean they're varying on too dangerous for PvE, but in PvP they're a bit ridiculous. And then your warding flask only lasts you until they recast it. So I would like there to be a place for perma curses and sort of party versus party kind of thing. And I want curses to be important in PvP, but you're right in that at the moment the counter to curses is too weak and the curses are too strong. That's a remarkably evil idea. Certainly, it's something we could explore. We haven't looked at that sort of specifically. There are things that behave a little bit about it, like
a possibility of a half regen
flammability curse against people using Righteous Fire has some interesting effects for those people relying on their regen. So that is something we could potentially explore for PvP, but I wouldn't expect that necessarily out the gate on the first day, sort of a big PvP changes.
Yeah, lots of different developers at different times have discussed different ways to give regen nullification mechanics, and none have really stuck, but there's definitely ideas thrown around frequently of how we can, even just for players to give answers to tough rare monsters they wouldn't otherwise be able to beat, just a way to cut their regen or their leech out.
Right, maybe like a Mortal Strike type ability where it, reduces it by half for a few seconds at a time every swing or something like that.
Sorry about that. I asked.
Yeah, I mean that's
the half
something
regen
we could
curse.
explore. Also, one thing I find that's hard to explain to people who aren't really doing PvP is how long PvE times are in PvP. So you save for a couple of seconds, and that's a very long time in a PvP match, and will have a huge effect.
But against a boss that you're going to be fighting for a minute and a half, it would feel like nothing really. So it's hard to get those numbers feeling good. I mean, not so much balanced, but feeling good in both PvP and PvE.
So I asked Chris last time when we talked to him about some of the more overarching structures that you guys had for the PvP tournament and ladder structure. Is there any more information that you guys can share about, like any solid details that you have worked out at this time?
Or even prototypes?
I can probably discuss it a little. We try to be a little bit cagey about such things. Plans change, and then people will sort of quote us as saying this is what's happening, and then if it doesn't, they get a bit upset. But we've definitely looked at tournament structures a bit. I don't know if you've ever seen any speed chess tournaments, but the kind of tournament where there's not like a set amount of rounds, and you're not always sort of waiting for the next round to start. But as soon as you finish a match, you're straight into another match, and you're in a match with people who are immediately available. And then you sort of score it based on something like total wins, so it rewards you for killing fast, and it also can give you a reason to concede. Like, this match has taken a while, I'm not going to win it, I might as well concede. Now, there are a number of considerations with this, particularly if someone can sort of troll a match to being long, or try and forcing a concession on a match that they weren't actually going to win. So we'd certainly have to make sure that defense is available in PvP matched up with that kind of tournament structure. On a more general sense, outside of the tournaments, we have looked at sort of various rating systems, and they've sort of ranged from the quite sophisticated Gluco or True Skill like things down to sort of more simpler, old-fashioned sort of ELO systems. These also have problems, but the main problem they have is you need a large population of people playing PvP. One advantage with the tournament is getting people playing PvP at the same time, which would help with such a system. So we really want that style of system in a tournament, or we're better off having that like only quickly Swiss chess styling people against people who've got similar abilities is something that needs to be worked out in more detail.
So is there going to be any type of MMR, matchmaking built into the people that it queues you against, or is it just going to be whoever the next guy is on the line is going to be the next guy that you fight? And I know you guys talked about the tournaments being quantity of wins, but does that take into account the people you beat by chance, or like if there's one guy that's at the top and you just crush that guy repeatedly and he still wins just because he happened to get matched up with the right opponents that he could easily kill?
So that's a worthwhile question. We've got to look at if you sort of match people against similar records, you've got to make sure there's not a strategy where someone loses early and then racks up a whole lot of wins towards the end. So that you've got to be very quickly facing people of similar records. The main reason to match people up against people of similar records is actually so that the matches are more fun for them. And we've got to avoid, you don't want your best PvPers to go into something like that and not win or feel that they didn't deserve their placing, or worse, have someone win and then sort of go, I cheesed my way to this victory, haha, kind of thing. So MMR is probably more useful outside of a tournament context and more useful in general queuing, but again, you've got to have enough people queuing at once. At the moment, if we had an MMR system, you're either going to wait a very long time for matches, and more likely you've got better people waiting in queues for PvP, so you're likely to enter a queue and end up with the same person regardless, even if there was a rating system.
Right. Now, are you guys sticking with the structure that Chris mentioned last time, where there would be different PvP, say at 2 o'clock today there's a PvP tournament on standard, and then later today, maybe at 8 o'clock there's one on Nemesis? Or is it going to be all simultaneous where you just queue into your league so that way it doesn't force people to have to play different leagues in order to reach the top of the PvP overall ladder?
So there's sort of advantages to doing it either way. There's certainly people who would want to be able to play PvP on different ladders, and the ladders have different, the different leagues have different numbers of people in them and different numbers of people sort of engaged in PvP. So we do know that if we try to run it all at the same time, one, it's a bit more diffuse, and some leagues wouldn't have enough population, and there might be more population if people who are playing in some of the other leagues might also have a PvP character in one of the others. So we're probably more likely to not run them all simultaneously, and we also want there to be good opportunities to have fun for people who don't normally do PvP, so that they can go, well, I've got a character in domination. I could go into a tournament and have some fun, and I could, kill some people and get killed by the good people. So we've got to make sure that there are those opportunities as well.
So will the ladders be set up where there's one overall ladder, or will there be like this is the standard ladder, this is the hardcore ladder, and these are the people in the specific leagues that are at the top.
So what we'll probably have is some way that people within a given league can compare themselves to other people who are serious about PvP. And there'll probably be another sort of ladder which is rewarding for how good you are at PvP, but it's more sort of accumulation of points or something like that. So a bit similar to races at the moment. Serious races don't always take someone's, sort of standing on the race points that seriously. But if someone's got 3 placing in standard and they look at their record and they can see which individual races they've won, they'll take that person a lot more seriously than maybe they've got 400, 500 points on the ladder.
Are you guys okay with diamond uniques being powerful for PvP and not PvE? Would this allow them to be stronger in that regard?
Diamond uniques are an interesting one because there are definitely ones that are created for PvP, but I do everything I can to make sure that when they're created, they have a use in PvE as well. But there's always going to be something that's more powerful in PvP, and if a supporter wants their item to be a cool PvP item that helps this build out in PvP, that's I'm all for it. A lot of diamond uniques we get are requesting making an already powerful build more powerful, which is tricky to do because the numbers can't be, it can't be that powerful unique because it has to be comparable with whatever else they'd be using. But diamond uniques having a place in PvP is awesome. Like, uniques should be doing cool things, and PvP is where cool things can take place.
Okay. Do you guys... go ahead.
We obviously don't want someone to sort of say, haha, I'm going to win PvP by making this item, and I know that just the build that works for it. But if someone says, I want a powerful PvP item, and this item is for PvP, that is obviously something we can work with. And it's usually best if people actually tell us their intentions with an item, because we like to give people what they want, as long as it, also works within the game.
Do you plan on sticking with the structure right now of having to recast auras and minions if that ends up being a thing each round in PvP?
I've got quite mixed opinions about this. There's some advantages to the current system, and there is sort of some interest in the, some people like the fact that there's this bit of time where you have to get this together, and that it's an interruptible thing, that it's not strictly part of your build, and you couldn't get away with like running sort of 7 auras, which is admittedly not so much of a problem now, and that you could make a character which is designed to just sort of charge across the arena and deal with them. On the other hand, we don't want it to just be busy work. We don't want you to have every match start with exactly the same key presses, because that's not interesting. So ideally, I'd like some in between where there are some choices about what you enable. For summoners are a pretty difficult PvP problem. If you got to always come in with the same set of specters that you chose from the best place, and you always had them with the best things for them, it would be hard not to have that be quite a strong part of PvP, but at the moment, sort of summoners aren't a feature really in PvP, so that's sort of hard to get right.
Yeah, that would require new mechanics, like something that lets you fast cast your minions, but give them a limited duration, or something like that. Something that would change up how minions work entirely, and it would have to be specifically designed for PvP.
Okay. Before we move to the last section, what do you guys think about ears, whether it be in a cutthroat league or even just in the tournaments?
We definitely like players to have something to accumulate, and certainly in a cutthroat environment, people want to be able to sort of have a leaderboard of kills, whether that's strictly in an ear style or a sort of a trophy kind of system is another question, but we definitely want that sort of thing to be trackable.
Yeah, when you drop items in cutthroat, that is almost a trophy, but it'd be cool to have it really personalized. This is an awesome ring I got from orcs when I killed them that one time.
Yeah, and you put bounties on people and all that good stuff.
Okay, we're going to shift the podcast towards item design and progression. The first question is GGG happy with the item progression with the current leagues? What generalizations can you make about what happened in Anarchy and Onslaught versus what happened in Domination and Nemesis?
So as far as happiness goes, it's always interesting when we got questions that are sort of phrased that way. To a certain extent, we're never happy. I mean, even if everyone else was happy with it, we'd probably look at it and go, it's not really quite right yet. So we're certainly open to sort of looking at changes and probably always will be. For Onslaught and Nemesis, not specifically just the hardcore leagues, but those sort of 4-month periods, this season, when we've looked at the player stats and we've looked at the builds and we've looked at the uniques used and the rares used, the standout feature for this time is we might have dealt with some of the sort of the power issues, but there's definitely, they've highlighted a whole lot of costing issues. This season, people haven't necessarily been doing the most powerful builds because there are these sort of cheap, easy options. And some of the builds that would have been powerful previously, they're probably still powerful, but they're a lot harder for people to put together, especially when there is an easier option for them. Something we'll want to look at to make sure that, to a certain extent, the reward of a build matches how difficult it is to put together. That being said, we've got to make sure that of the most powerful builds that there is some sort of parity. We notice when we've got better balance, we've got better retention. So, you know, we're not going to say you can make a character that's better than all the others if you put in this effort, because we know that people will if that's available.
Do you guys make balance changes to orbs based on statistics and item progression? Do you guys do orb design to fill a void in the game or just to shift the economy? And lastly, do you have notifications when rare items such as mirrors, combs, soul takers drop to make sure that nothing is broken with the drop rates?
So in closed beta and an open beta, there was probably more changes to orbs than there are currently. Like, we haven't actually done a great deal of change to orb drops or behaviors recently at all. We do sort of keep an eye on it and make sure where things are. We get quite a lot of cries for intervention and sort of how much things trade for, but to a certain extent, where the economy does to a certain extent take care of itself. When you see a shift in prices, it's usually in reaction to something. So we haven't actually needed to do many changes to orbs sort of since release. That being said, that doesn't mean there won't be changes, and it doesn't mean there won't be sort of new things coming as far as sort of orbs go. For uniques, we don't like sort of have a notification when a unique drops, but we do sort of have a rough idea of what's entering the economy, and we do sort of keep an eye on what people are equipping and knowing what sort of numbers of unique are out there. Although recently, of the characters in a month, we've got more uniques equipped. You know, one of characters that have played within a month, the number of uniques that have been equipped have sort of hit over 1,048,000 or whatever. So, which makes it a bit hard to do generalized stats across all of them. I have to not use Excel instead.
Do you guys hold out on potential uniques with the hopes of a diamond or eternal supporter filling the void, such as CI Quiver?
We don't specifically hold out, but we've got a set of uniques designed by Eric and by Brother Laz that we put in addition to the supporter uniques. And oftentimes, whenever there is a supporter unique planned, and we've got a huge queue for supporter uniques, there's a lot of people who have discussed their ideas or are starting to discuss their ideas that won't be in for a while, simply just because we don't have the time to put that many in at the moment. Hopefully we will in future. But this means that we've got plenty of leeway. We can say, okay, this supporter has requested this unique that spawns bunnies, so we're going to cut out this Brother Laz unique that was spawning bunnies and change it to something else later. We'll tell Brother Laz to switch it up for something else.
The other mistake we're more likely to make is, in fact, putting a unique in that's one of our designs and then having a supporter go, I requested something just like this or very similar to this. and it's like, oh, we kind of have sort of comped on that space a bit, and we should have paid better attention.
Yeah, we've got hundreds of supporter uniques in the queue, and they're being dealt with by different people, by Eric, by Carl, myself at the moment. So it's hard to keep track of all of them.
But if you're interested in quivers, you should have a look next time the new stuff comes out. There might be some interesting stuff there.
Nice.
How long do you think it's going to take to get through that backlog of uniques? Because I know I still have another one that I can make. I'm just waiting, to give the people who haven't had a chance to go ahead and design one. I know there's many people who haven't even gotten to do their first one yet.
Yeah, it's going to... Well, at the moment, I'm the only one really focusing on it, but I'm also doing all the new, minor skills and all the new bosses and all the other uniques as well as a lot of other planning stuff for new features. So we're getting someone new in to do some... Hopefully end up doing some design and hopefully work on item design. But I'm very picky about who works on these items because they're very close to my heart. So making sure the item design is the direction we want to go with it is hard. So we can't just let anyone in the design team or in the development team take over it at the drop of a hat.
Right. It's pretty dangerous if something gets through.
Exactly. Yeah, I made some mistakes early on and maybe recently as well when it comes to letting powerful uniques slip in. So you've got to keep a close handle on it, and also just keeping them interesting. It's easy to have them become too complex or too generic.
So what type of impact does the rarity have on the power level of the unique that is in question?
There is sort of a belief, that sort of comes from CCGs that rarity should have no effect on this, which is kind of based on a CCG that you might claim something to be rare, but people will find a way to get it. While that is true for the most powerful items, we can't say just because they're rare they get to be more powerful than other things. We do have to be careful around availability, so it actually almost works the other way around. So if you look at, say, Bringer of Rain, which I know is a lot of people are thinking about at the moment and get a lot of suggestions about. It is a powerful item, but you can certainly imagine a more powerful item than this. People do equip, if you make a good helmet and you find a good chest, you're almost certainly going to be able to eventually get something better than Bringer of Rain. But Bringer of the Rain is reasonably available and it's very good for its availability. So rarity is a factor. We just can't say because this is rare, this is allowed to be super powerful. So yes, it's a factor, but there is a balance that has to happen regardless of rarity, and then there is a balance that has to happen including rarity as a concept.
Okay. I had the next question. You guys already answered it, so I'm just going to skip that. So, Rotana, you can take the next one.
Sorry. Can you each give us one example of something that hit the live or open beta servers which required rebalancing and explain the process that went behind it?
Well, one memorable one is the Carrion Queen accident, where Carrion Queen wasn't giving corrupted blood stacks, so I made a change to the stat that's used, but it turned out that stat was also affecting their spitter projectiles, which put their damage through the roof. So that was a very quick change, and that was pretty much just lower the damage back down again and put some adjustments to it in very quickly. Another recent one is Barrage. Right at the end of the testing and development of Barrage, we reduced the number of projectiles with it, so it was shooting 5 projectiles, now it's shooting 3 extra, so 4 total. But when we did that, I made a slight clerical error and cut the damage down far more than it should have been. So that's a thing in 1.10. We'll see a sort of at least 50% damage increase to Barrage to fix that mistake. It's mostly mistakes more than wild things. Generally, an item is balanced for the current metagame, though, so think skills will be rebalanced as time goes on, as the metagame shifts. Fireball was much more powerful back in the day, but as new skills were introduced, it became less whelming, and so we have to keep buffing its damage over time.
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot of things we've had to rebalance. We used to probably, in open beta and closed beta even more so, rely a bit more on the fact that we had a bit more freedom to change things, so you could just stick things a little bit powerful in and then nerf them down. But we found that people don't react to that well. People like to have this skill come out and be fairly safe that it's going to be similar for a while. And then there are skills which require sort of constant rebalance. So some skills are quite robust. You don't need to change them very often. And some, every time you change anything else, the skill changes along with it. So like Molten Shell, every time you do stuff to do with balance or life, we need to go over all those values and look at them and make sure they're about right and sort them out. And you get things like Righteous Fire, which is very sensitive to top end gear and very sensitive to what other things are happening in the game. So that shifts a lot, although to a certain extent we let Righteous Fire sort of shift out and shift back, like it was not very well used early in the leagues, and then it sort of shifted back into prominence a bit more recently.
So for that testing, is that something that the devs do themselves when they're either balancing or designing new content, and then pass it off to Neon and his team, and ask them, say, hey, can you break this, and try and see what problems there are with it?
Personally, I work with Neon quite a lot, all through the development of a skill. Like, I've been to in-game, but I don't have his experience by a large margin. He knows, and he's got a finger on the pulse. He knows what people are saying and thinking top of the game. So it's really, we work with him early in the skill, how will this act in-game, and then later on when he builds those builds that he's been theorizing about since we first started discussing it, and see how it plays out, while Carl and myself focus more on the early game experience, how a player feels when they first pick it up and whether it feels impactful then, and then it's with its progression through the game, which is a lot easier to look at numerically. You can tell this is how much damage a skill should be doing at 40 and 50, but while once you get to 80, there's so many compounding factors that only understanding what is efficient on an in-game character is the only real way to test it out, which is where Neon shines.
Nice, that's very interesting.
It's certainly not a sort of a production line where it sort of goes in one end and then it goes through a bunch of steps and pops out the other end. There's a lot of iteration back and forth and a lot of testing, which can, if we make a character specifically for the skill, how does it work? If we take someone's existing characters and just swap a skill out and put this one back, how does it work? If we then adjust their character, how does it work? So, and we've got to be quite careful because often someone's first experience with a skill is not its most powerful form. It is usually literally, I take this skill, which is a similar element or a similar kind of skill, out of my character's links, and I throw this other skill in, and then how does it play? So we've actually had skills which we've sort of balanced based on their most powerful use, and then the reaction from the community over the next 2 days is skill sucks, is no good. So we've got to be reasonably mindful about where a skill fits in a variety of different uses, while still also making sure that sort of there is balance at the high-end play.
Yeah, like Raging Spirit, for example, when we were testing it, we started off, this is a bit meh, and then we started trying out different supports, different combinations, until we were trying every single combination, and then we found one that works really well, or a few options that work really well, really, and then the balance started to shift around that. And so when people pick it up for the first time in the game, they've never seen a short duration minion skill that's this high damage and this unsurvivable, and so the working out how to work with the best is something that takes time, a lot more with unique skills like Spectral Throw and Raging Spirit than things like Lightning Trap, but it's always important.
So one thing we've got to bear in mind as well, while we hear a great deal about sort of the balance, as well as that, most people aren't playing the game in that style. We actually look at the stats, most people are playing in normal, and then the people playing in normal cruel outnumber the people playing Merciless a lot. Most of our players play in softcore leagues by a large margin, yet a lot of the conversation is driven by high-level hardcore players. Now this is really important, that we've got to have those players catered for, and we've got to have the balance good there, and we know if the balance is not good there, it hurts us. But as well as that, we've got to make sure that if you're not one of those players, you pick up a skill that's got to be good, and you've got to have those players hear other people talking about the top end sort of longer term, more invested players that the skill is good. And both those things need to be true.
Yeah, when it comes to skill design, we often talk to a lot of the other developers that aren't designers because they have different psychological profiles. They care about different things when it comes to the skill. They care about it feeling like big explosions when you hit stuff, or they care about the in-game balance if we're talking about Neon and some of the other QA team, or if it's like Carl and myself, they care about the interactions with other skills, how it fits into to make an interesting character that does lots of different things rather than just one thing with a lot of power behind it. So, and even just how it fits into the lore, or how it feels in the game, whether it feels like something that fits in Ray class. So all that stuff is important, and it's a very collaborative process because we're talking to a bunch of different people and seeing how they feel about it, how they feel about how it looks, and how it plays, and whether they feel like hitting hard enough, even though we know technically number-wise they are.
Well, see, we're over our time slot here, so Carl, Rory, I want to thank both you guys a lot for spending some of your free time to answer a lot of these questions, and it's provided a lot of insight that usually we don't get to hear. So just want to thank you guys very much for spending this time with us.
That was great. I could talk all day about this stuff, so some other time, definitely.
Awesome. At this time, I'd also like to thank the viewers for attending and listening. I'd like to thank Twitch for the venue for making this possible, and Uspan for the design of the layout, and his company dapadesign.com for the splash screen. Thank you for all the moderators helping out with the live event. Are there any last words that you guys like to say to the PoE fans out there?
March 5th, Sacrifice of the Baal. You should have a look at the news and see what's coming up, and there'll be more news coming over the next few weeks. And if you're listening to this for some reason and you're not familiar with Path of Exile, www.pathofexile.com, and you'll be able to make yourself an account and play the game.
And Carl, I'd also like to thank you. Those last two Diamond supporters, those are like such excellent reads. I really, really, really like that kind of stuff, and it just makes me excited, and I just love hearing and learning about the process that goes behind, game development, all that kind of stuff. Keep up the good work with those newsletters.
I'm glad you enjoy them.
All right, I want to thank you both, and that's going to conclude our podcast with the balanced developers of Path of Exile. It's free to play. Check it out on Steam, and let the guys know what you think about it on their forums.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
See ya.